20-25 minutes of some tips and tricks for Opsview, just to maybe some lesser known things, lesser known options, lesser known settings that you might not know about that should hopefully help you get the best out of your Opsview installation. Yeah, any questions, please use WebEx chat and just we'll address them at the end of the session today. I'd like to do a quick recap for those of us who weren't on the Essentials course. So for those of us who were on, for those of us who weren't on the Essentials course, just a quick recap of the Opsview basics. So we've got the concept of hosts and services, and a host is just a container for our service checks. So a host would be this a database server would be a host, and a service are all of the service checks that run on that host. So these are all of the interesting things within Opsview. All of our useful information comes from a service check. A service is something that we are interested in, so anything that we care about. Plugins do the actual work, so it's plugins that do all of the heavy lifting within Opsview. They do the actual service check. So if I've got a service check to check the space available on a disk, or how busy my CPU is, or indeed things like database reads and writes and queries and various other database metrics, all of that comes from a plugin, and it's the plugins which report back into Opsview. So our plugins do all of the work. They're the scripts or the exes that do the actual monitoring. Our hosts and services are organized into groups. So like we see here, we've got host groups on the left. All of my hosts will be logically organized into a host group. And similarly with service checks, I've got service groups where all my service checks are are grouped into service groups. And this just makes it easy to find your checks as you're configuring your system. And it's also really useful for configuring access and roles. So you can configure access only to specific service checks. So if you are making a role, you can limit that to things in specific service groups. So you can do it for host groups, of course. So if I wanted to limit access to my host group or a host group I made in April, or some web servers or some databases, I can do that, but I can also do it for specific service checks. So if I'm interested in only my MySQL checks, I can make a role for a specific user that only has access to those MySQL checks. So they're really useful for configuring access. Both host checks and service checks use plugins. So the concept of host checks is a little well, that's actually from the Essentials course, so I won't go into it too much now, but host checks just determine whether a host is up, and they too will use plugins. And then all of this information, all of the fun stuff that we pull in from our hosts using our service checks and our host checks, they can all be viewed using our dashboard. So if I middle click on this dashboard, I can create and modify some nice dashboards to help me visualize all the information that Opsview has been gathering these last few hours. So this is a very brief recap on the Opsview Essentials. Everything uses plugins, basically. Okay, so on to performance. There are a few performance tuning tips and tricks that you guys might find useful, especially if your Opsview installation is growing. So things like tuning our MySQL databases, distributing our databases, so having them spread out over a few systems, clustering. So by clustering, I mean adding in collector servers that you may well know as slaves from Opsview 5. But collector servers means that we can offload some of the service checking work to different systems and have them perform and run all of our plugins. First one I want to cover though is these Starman server processes, and you might be asking me what Starman is. Starman is the web server used via Catalyst that generates these, that displays the dynamically generated pages. So this web page here that you see, so anytime you interact with the Opsview web interface, uses a Starman worker thread. And it's this that talks to Catalyst, that then talks to all of our message queue, CouchDB application. So the application talks to the Catalyst, which talks to a web server, which is then displayed in your browser. So if you have a lot of users accessing your system concurrently, you may want to increase this max value. So if you want to be able to increase that to 20, so if you have more than 10 users accessing it, you maybe want to increase that number up to 12, 15, 20. You can do that by editing this Opsview web.local file. So if we take a very quick look, this is my training system. And if I take a look at my Opsview web local config file, we'll see I've changed max servers to 20 and min servers to 5. I've also got a few other useful things in here, which we may get to if we've got time. But this is my LDAP config and my rehomed pathway. So if you look here, you see I've rehomed Opsview, so it gets pointed to Opsview. So I've rehomed that a little bit. But big one here is max servers is 20, min servers is 5. So I can spawn 20 of these web interface sessions now. So it's much more responsive at the cost of memory. So if I were to take a look at my system, I can see I've got my minimum 5 going right now, but if a bunch of people started logging in, I could have up to 20 of these. And each of these use around 300 megs of RAM. So you know how costly that's going to be resource-wise, but because I've got a fair amount of RAM on this system, I can get away with it. By default, it's going to be 10, but if, like I say, if it's a busy system and lots of people start using it, just modify that, add max servers 20, and restart Opsview web, and then at the cost of some RAM, you can have more of these running. So quite useful setting, and one that I make on very busy systems quite a lot. And then slightly related to that is security settings. So we've got a few parameters added in Opsview 6.3.5 for security. So we can configure the throttling parameters for when an account gets locked out. What this means is a single attempt from an IP count. So you'll have 50 single attempts from an IP address if they're logging in via the API, for example, and a single attempt for a user. So if I keep attempting to log in incorrectly and I breach this user limit threshold, then I'll be locked out for a full hour. So this just prevents or helps prevent unauthorized users getting access to your system. So that's another thing you can add to a config file, and that's going to be in Opsview deploy etc user vars, and we'll see a few settings. Well, we've got the login throttling here, so IP limit, IP windows. If I don't like these, I can take a look and modify here. We also now, along with security, if I was to change my password, I'm not going to because my password lives in muscle memory now. But if I wanted to change my password, we have security settings that will tell us how strong or otherwise our password is, and if it's going to be accepted. So you can also modify those settings if you don't want this. So if you want to, if you don't want to enforce that, you can. But by default, enforcing password strength is now included in Opsview 6.3.5. So one thing I often notice when I do either training courses and when I am delivering like on-site consultancy work for some customers is that the bulk edit options are often overlooked and missed. So I want to just cover them, make sure everyone knows that bulk edit actually exists, and that we can make quick changes to some of our hosts, because this can save you a huge amount of time if you're moving systems around or changing them to or changing variables or adding them to a new host template. So say we are going to create a new host template for a system and we want to use bulk edit, we can do that. So if I want to very quickly use different thresholds for say 5 or 10, or in this case it's just going to be 2 systems, what I'm going to do is create a new host template. So I'm going to clone a host template. I'm going to just call it NT host template cloned, and then I'm going to use the bulk edit feature in hosts here to quickly change 2 of these systems to use a slightly different host template. So now I go to bulk edit, and I can just add a host template in a few clicks. So I'll find my new cloned host template, and in a few clicks, these 2 systems, or these however many it may be, 10, 15, 50 systems, are now using that different host template, and that's using our bulk edit option. And to make use of it, all I've done is I've clicked the 2 systems I'm interested in, and then I've hit bulk edit up here in the top. And there's loads we can change here, so if you weren't aware this existed, do take a look, because it might be able to save you a little bit of time. Coupled with bulk edit, if we use our host template, so if I modify this host template and change one of my service checks, I can just use slightly different thresholds, or slightly different settings, or slightly different whatever I need, slightly different thresholds, a different host address, a different port. For example, using these exceptions just for this cloned host template. So the 2 systems I added will be using these modified settings, and that's through using the exceptions options for a host template. So not always immediately obvious what's going on with the exceptions and with variables and with host templates. What this means is I can just apply very, very custom settings to a subset of systems in just a few clicks. So bulk edit and your exceptions are really powerful if you get if you have a requirement to make that kind of changes. Whilst this is running in the background, you'll notice, if you're used to Opsview 5, that we can now run these changes in the background and just keep working away quite happily. We'll also see I've got a nice progress indicator, and it's much faster than it was ever in Opsview 5. But I'm going to leave that to run, and then I'm going to make a quick change to another one of my systems. So let's try, sure, I've got a system in here somewhere. Yep. And let's add or remove a variable or 2, just so we can see the effects variables have. And in this case, it's going to be the effect that check multiple has. So if I'm going to have 2 variables on this system, both of which are disk. So one's going to check file of MySQL, which is where my data is, my MySQL data is mounted, and one's just going to check etc. And this is going to be on NT test host May 2020. So what we'll see is that we were checking disk for one partition. And by the time I click reload, we should be checking the disk usage on these 3 partitions, because the check task service check uses an option called check multiple, and that check multiple reads however many disk variables we have and creates service checks to one second, guys, and creates the required service checks. Let's see. Sandy. this will do, just demonstrate how variables work and how check multiple work. So if you've got a service check and you need multiple versions of the same service check to run and read multiple variables, then check multiple is the best way to do it, because now I should go from one disk check to, in a moment, I'll have 3. So just a quick and easy way to create multiple service checks without having to copy each service check multiple times. If I use that check multiple option, I'm automatically going to have multiple service checks to check the same thing. And that's just set here. So sometimes this can be missed. So create multiple service checks is very, very powerful, very useful. Okay, so let's go and how long we got left? We've got 8 or so minutes. Nice. Okay, so let's check. Oh, so this is quite a handy one. If we go to our notification profiles, what I want to cover is maybe creating an escalation level for our notifications. So say we are going to pick on my database servers again, which I will. So we've got database servers, and imagine one of these goes down, or we've got some critical alerts on one of them, and a database admin needs to be told. We can create I'm going to close that down now. We can create a databases notification method. So I'll change that back to email. And this will tell me about everything that's down in our databases host group, for example. Remove Slack from here for now. And we see here we've got send from alert number 1. So this will send us an alert the first time this service check fails. If I then wanted to create an escalated or use a different method, or have just a slightly different method for the 3rd or 4th time that this had alerted, so in effect creating an escalation alert. So I just changed this send from alert number to 3 or 5 or 10, and I can have a whole different audience. So I can go from email alone to PagerDuty in Slack, and I can email a different set of users, or an admin user, or a manager, or a named escalating engineer. And it can tell me a lot more information. It can tell me about everything that may be having an issue, and I can be told about things, or I can bring in help should I need it if these databases are still having issues. So the check or send alert from option here, send from alert number, is really, really handy. Okay, I think this brings us on to our ODW. So if we go to my system, if I check the ODW tab, I want to clarify a little bit about what these maybe mean. So enable ODW import. That's going to import your historical events, and like it says there, the summarized availability of stats and your host and service check status over time. This is retention period in months. The extended import is every single plot point. So that's all of your historical service check info, including the performance metrics and the things like CPU usage and stats. Anything that comes in as perf data, that's stored too. So if you enable extended import and select a retention level, you can store that raw performance data for as long as you want. In my case, I've just got it stored for 1 month, but I mean the default here is disabled, and when you enable it, a lot of customers use 6 months. So this is to be able to report on historical performance trends using the data in the ODW, and that's slightly different to the data that's in the data that generates your graphs. So it's slightly different to this data. So this data, you still see graphs and you can still see data going back a long time. But the data in the ADW is used when we generate reports. I won't go into reports too much right now, but you report to use the data in your ADW, and one of these reports, your daily performance report or your monthly performance report, these performance reports use that data. And you need to pick a host group, so I'll go for, I think, web servers, pick an end date, and this will show me a lot of data for my performance report, for using my extended performance data. This should bring us on to troubleshooting. And the best way to troubleshoot an issue with Opsview is often with log files, and it's one of the first things that support will ask for or support will take a look at, and it's also one of the first things that I myself will start looking at if there's an issue. Interestingly, Opsview 6 now will use syslog or rsyslog or syslog-ng to manage logging and manage individual component logging. And we can increase the logging verbosity on a per component basis. So I'll very quickly run through where Opsview logs live. So that's varlog Opsview, opsview.log. And here's our standard log file. But what I've done here is turn on logging level to debug for just my executor. So I've got a lot more Opsview executor information in my log files than I would by default. And one of the best ones, one of the best logging changes, if you're trying to troubleshoot a service check and can't see why it's not working, you can enable debug on your Opsview executor to see the full output for your service check. So if we take a look very quickly here, I can see the full output of my command and what it's actually doing. So there's loads you can glean if you turn on executor debug mode. It's one of my first changes if I'm digging into something. And this is going to be my final tip because I think I've just about run out of time. And it's a really handy one in case you forget your admin password. So by that I mean the password you use to log in as admin here. If you forget this password, I love Opsview, you can change it back using this little MySQL command here, and that's the encrypted version of this is just the encrypted text of the phrase, sorry, of the word initial. So that just changes it back to your initial password, your admin and initial login details. So we've put this on the website as well if you ever need to do that, but just be aware that you can, if you want to, reset your password if you still have root access to your database, which hopefully you will. You just log in as your root user, and then it's the admin user in this contacts table here. Should be ID 1. And all we're doing is resetting the password so that you can log back in. Okay, time for one last tip. This one's really useful. If you want to, now that Opsview is using message queues, if you want to keep an eye on the state and size and number of entries in your message queue, you can use the included little utility RabbitMQCTL and just list your queues. So if you want to keep an eye on your queues and see what's in there, mine are all in pretty decent shape. Everything's at 0, so that means they're all being dealt with pretty well. Well, no, collector queue. There's a few on a collector I turned off, so that's gonna sit there at 966 until I turn my collector back on. So you can do list queues and see what's going on with your Opsview queues. I believe I've run out of time, so Helen, do we have any questions? How are we doing?
You have run out of time, but we have 2 quick questions. So if there's any more questions, please put them on the chat facility. If we can't cover them now, we'll reply to you via email. So Neil, first question, can interface thresholds be pushed via bulk edit?
For SNMP, probably not, but you could use the API for that. Ask your friendly Opsview support chap to do that, but interface thresholds can't be pushed via bulk edit, sadly, no.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, can you bulk add variables?
No. So you mean add the same variable to like 100 hosts?
Yeah.
Again, that's something for the API to do. That wouldn't be something that bulk edit can do just yet, although you wouldn't be the first to ask that.
Okay. And actually, there's one more question just coming in, not about bulk edits, but about how easy is it to upgrade from 5 to, you mentioned 6.3.5.
Yeah.
How easy is it?
So, it really does depend. If it's any kind of, if it's a large system spread across a bunch of servers, it's all documented, but it really would be something that Opsview support and Opsview professional services can help with. It is all documented. It's perfectly possible to do it if you're a sysadmin, but we have been doing these upgrades since the start of last year, so we've got pretty good at them. So if you do want to take an older system, like an old 5.4 system or even older, then Opsview support and Opsview PS will happily help you out with that.
Thank you, Neil. And one last question that's just been squeezed in. How to pull the triggered notifications in Opsview console?
I'm honestly, so that I think we'll need a little bit more information around that one, because that could mean a few things. So I don't think I can answer that on this little training course. Maybe something for support. They'll be very happy to help you out with that. If you just want to list your notifications, you can do that here. But if there's something, I better log in. But you can do that from the notifications page here. But if it's something else you're after, so if you go to notifications, you can see the list of notifications that have gone out. My system's been pretty quiet the last 12 hours or so, but you'd see a list here. If that's what you mean, you can do that from monitoring/notifications. That's available in 6 and 5, so that might be what you're after.
Fabulous. Thank you, Neil. That is all of the questions. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Stay safe and well and healthy. And we'll catch you on the next webinar, which is on network monitoring, which is on the 28th of May. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.